morning and happy Tuesday. My name is Brenda Meller. I am the host of the show here called Enthusiastically Self-Employed, and I'm delighted to see all of you joining us here this morning. We had a little bit of a hiccup this morning. This was my hiccup. I don't make mistakes. I have learning experiences, and I was telling Josh in the pre-show that my live stream was scheduled to go live at 9:05 p.m. and 9:05 a.m. and StreamYard Josh won't allow me to edit the time on LinkedIn. So I had to create a new event. So I'm going to dig for just a second and post the link so folks can find it. But if anyone is watching this live on LinkedIn right now, please drop a comment below. That will let us know that the live stream is picking up and that you can see us loud and clear. And while they are doing that, Josh, you and I met through by way of Bobby Carlton, who I know through Innovation Women, and I met through someone else. It's like referral from referral. But I know a little bit about you, and I'd love for you to take a minute or two and tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what do you do, and who do you help, if you could.
Okay. It's good to get the chance to be here. I have been working with people in the Boston area since the late Cretaceous period. That's how long I've been around. Most relevant part of my experience is that I spent 20 years as an analyst at Forrester Research, and then the tail end of that, I concentrated on publishing books. I co-wrote the book people see behind me, Groundswell, with Charlene Lee. That was a bestseller, sold 150,000 copies. I co-wrote 2 other books while I was there. And since 2015, I have been concentrating exclusively on helping authors with business books. I've worked on more than 50 book projects. And, I guess the latest thing is that's all been assembled here into this Build a Better Business book. Publication date today, Tuesday. And that's what I'm here to do, is to help people who are interested in writing business books.
Did you say the publication book is today?
Today is the official publication date. That's right.
Give me just a second. I'm hearing an echo in the background because I'm trying to find our stream, Josh. And I realized the window opened up on its own. I'm like, where did that come from? Sorry about that. So you said your big business book, your publication date is today for that book again. Could you hold that book up again and read the title for
Sure.
us?
Okay. So here's the book, Build a Better Business book, published by Amplify, available on Amazon. You can also find it at bernoff.com/books on my website.
Well, happy publication day, and thank you for coming on and celebrating with us. It's very exciting to hear.
I'm excited to talk about it.
That's great. Well, I see that our comments are starting to pop in, Josh. So that means our live stream is working. Thank you, audience, for letting us know. I see
They'll
Kate.
find you wherever you are. They'll find you.
Well, that's what I was telling you to the pre-show. I'm like, we'll figure it out, and I'll let my audience know. I've always heard a good rule of being a speaker is let the audience know if something is amiss, so they're not thinking it's just them. But then let's quickly pivot and move on, because we're professionals here and we want to get the show going on here. But this is when I ask for audience comments, Josh, it's kind of like the mic tap. If we were to be in person and we were to tap the mic and say,
can you hear me in the back?
In the back? Exactly. Can you hear us in the back? And Ryan and Kate are saying hi, so we know the live stream is working. And I want to invite the rest of the audience. If you're watching, don't be shy. Go ahead and drop a comment and say hi to us if you can, especially if you are an author, either current or aspiring, because you never know who might be watching right now, who might be interested in looking you up, giving you a follow, and getting your book too. So don't be shy about dropping those comments in here. All right. So today, my friends, we are here talking about essential tips on how to write a business book that matters. And in the pre-show, Josh, I told you selfishly, I'm really looking forward to this topic myself, because I've written one book and I've got the inkling to write my next one and go on and on from there. So I know you've got some great advice for us, and I think I'd like to just jump right into the conversation, Josh, because I know there are people watching and listening and going to be watching this in the playback as well that are thinking about writing a business book. So what advice do you have for us?
Well, writing a business book is a great way to get your audience to know about your idea. The motivating thing that really has to be there is a desire to help your audience, whether your audience is, say, financial advisors or people who have just graduated from college. If your book is about helping them, it's more likely to succeed. If it's about how great you are, it's more likely to fail, unless, of course, it's a memoir of a famous person, but that doesn't apply to most of us. The number one thing that people don't understand about business books is that business books are stories. that you're telling a story about how people have a problem and how they can solve that problem, and it's made up of individual little stories about uh, people similar to people in your audience who had the problem and how they learned to solve the problem. If you
Mm.
understand how central story is, then you're much more likely to create a business book that's successful. And if you write it like a research report, which is what I tried to do, my first book proposal, sent it to my agent, and he's like, I can't sell this. If you try and put it together just based on facts, it's much less likely to succeed.
Hmm. Which would seem a little counterintuitive because I mean, and I think when you were writing it, I've been the same thing. It's a business book. It's got to have a business thrust to it, not a story's thrust, right?
Yes, that's true. But people still want to hear about folks who had to solve problems.
Mm,
So, for example, at the start of the book I just wrote, I talk about Jay Baer, the well-known marketing author, and
mhm,
how he assembled and then promoted his book, Talk Triggers.
mm,
And that's what you want, is you want people to look at that and say, oh, well, if I want to do this, what did he do that I can learn from? I also talk about people who had problems. So, for example, Fotini Economopoulos did a fantastic book on negotiation, but she explained to me that while she was working on it, she would go to a coffee shop every day and cry bitter tears
aw,
because she couldn't get it together to actually put the words on paper. And I talk
mhm,
about how you can get past that.
mhm,
Now, you still have to have ideas, you still have to have advice, you still have to have some sort of structures. It's
mhm,
helpful to have data of some kind to back up what you're doing. It's not like this is just a bunch of stories. We're not doing a short story collection. But in the absence of people and stories, you get a very dry tome that people just are much less likely to be interested in, much less likely to believe, and a whole lot less likely to share.
yeah. And it sounds like you've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and maybe
Mhm.
made or mistakes missed along the way in terms of that writing process. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I mean, I certainly learned from my own experiences in writing, collaborating with other authors, and ghostwriting. But in the 50 book projects that I worked on, they're mostly editing and coaching other authors. And
Mm,
every
mhm.
time I work with somebody new, I'm like, oh, you found yet another way to fail.
Right?
I mean, these are brilliant people. They have incredible ideas. And I'm like, oh, no, you can't write a book that way. Um,
Yeah.
so that was really the impetus behind assembling my book, was to basically say, let's put together the how-tos, the things that everybody needs to know about how to structure a book, how to collect the stories, how to do research, how to keep track
Mhm,
of it, how to write a chapter, how to organize the chapters into a book, how to find a publisher, and how to promote the book. These are things. There are better ways to do it, and there are ways that don't work so well. And I just wanted people to learn from those.
yeah. It sounds like bringing a lot of that expertise together, as you were talking about the different elements that are required. I mean, I've
Mm,
gone through the process once myself so far, and in the beginning it's kind of like it's very dreamlike, like, oh, I'm going to write a book and it's going to be this great New York sell
it's fan.
Times author, and we're going to have a great success with it, but
Mm,
there's all these little steps along the way to get there. So it's going from idea
mm,
to publish. It can be very daunting in on the process,
mm.
and it sounds like this is something you do. You work with people through that process. Is that right?
Yes, I do. I help people at the beginning with idea development, because
Mhm.
often the idea that they think they have is not sufficiently differentiated or not sharp enough.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
I help people with editing. Um, in a few cases, maybe once a year, I will ghostwrite a book, which is basically doing the typing, but it's your idea.
Right.
Um, and I help people. This isn't something that's tough to get paid for, but I do help people with selecting a publishing model, because
Mm,
pitching traditional publishers is one way to get published, but there's other options available now that you can use to get a successful business book out, and people are very confused by those options.
yeah, and to you, it's probably fairly
Hmm.
simple, I would imagine, because you've done it so many times. Or at least maybe it's a more clear on what the different routes are and which is the best for the particular author based on their scenario.
Uh,
Whereas From the outside perspective, it's like, that's overwhelming, right?
Uh, it's never simple. I
No?
think, well, there's this silly idea floating around that a book is like a business card now, that
Yeah.
it's just a way to make your name. And if you really want what people to know about you is that you wrote a crappy book, then go ahead, go for it. But
Mhm.
if you want it to be worth doing, then there's a lot of homework to do. Uh, and that's really what it amounts to, is to help people to do that homework in the proper way.
Yeah.
Um, Anything that's worth doing that takes 6 months or a year like this is going to have challenges along the way. So
Mhm.
it's never simple, really. But if you know what you're doing, you can at least avoid wasting your time on the stuff that doesn't really help.
That's great. So we're here today talking about essential tips on how to write a business book that matters for those folks that might be joining us a few minutes late. And I see Vicky was one of the people, Josh, who was looking at our original event, and I put the
Mhm,
link over there to redirect them. So we
mhm.
might get a couple more folks that are coming in. And with Vicky, we've just gotten the discussion started, and Josh is sharing with us right now some tips on writing a business book. So I'll let you continue on here, Josh.
Okay. Well, I think um, that that one of the things that people don't understand is the amount of research that's typically necessary.
Hmm.
Uh, because if you're going to write a book that's 45 or 60,000 words long, 150 or 200 pages long, um, there has to be useful stuff in there. We've all read these books that it's like the same thing over and over and over again. You're like, well, why didn't you just write a blog post, right?
Right.
So I will often get to the point where I'm editing one of these books, and I'm like, you you where did you get your source material from? Because there's not enough stories in here. And really,
Hmm.
the first thing people should do, right along with helping to define the idea, is to think about their own personal experience, talk to their clients, uh, keep an ear out for stuff that they see online or on social media, but start collecting those case studies of people who have had the challenge that you're talking about and how they solved it, and reach out directly. There's nothing uh, that's better than an actual first person interview with somebody who went through this, because then when the time comes to actually assemble the thing and start writing, you're like, okay, I have 30 interviews here, and these two can go in chapter 3 and these 3 can go in chapter 4, and you have the source material that you need to make it entertaining.
I love that, and I'm dropping that hint up on screen
Hmm.
for you too. If you're just getting started, start to kind of keep a
Hmm.
list of people that you could reference in case studies, people who've had that problem that you're addressing. And you talked a little bit earlier about the central story idea. And I know when you say that, I know what you're talking about when I'm thinking about like a children's book or a fiction
Hmm.
book. But the central story is something you feel strongly pertains to business books as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so let me explain what the story is in a typical
Hmm.
business book. So chapter 1 in any really good business book is the scare the crap out of you chapter. Okay? Because the purpose of chapter 1 is to get you to keep reading the rest of it. And in
Hmm.
order to do that, you have to motivate the reader. Now, there are two ways to scare the crap out of people: fear and greed. What is fear? Well, let's say you were writing a book on cybersecurity.
Hmm.
Okay. That's a fear book. It's like, you better pay attention to the stuff I'm saying, or something really bad could happen to your company. Ooh, okay. That's
Yeah.
excellent. Greed is also helpful, and that amounts to, if you do the things I talk about here, you will be able to be better off, more productive, get more leads, generate more revenue. Or if you don't do them, you'll be missing out. So then it's like, oh, I better pay attention because I don't want to miss out on this chance. So that's fear and greed. And you can have both if you want, but you have to have at least one. Then the rest of the book, typically the next chapter or two, define the solution to the problem that you're describing. Right,
Hmm.
here's the the way to think about it, the 5 steps, and so on. Then you go on and explain in more detail how to do those things, and then you explain the consequences of what you've talked about, maybe the second or third level consequences. And in terms of organizing, what I recommend is what I call the reader question method. So
Hmm.
each chapter should answer a specific question for the reader. That's a much better way to organize it than whatever way it is in your head.
Hmm.
So question might be, uh, you know, uh, why is this important? And then the next question might be, well, what are the 5 elements that I need to know about? And then the next question is, how do I do step 1? And so that tells you what belongs in each of those chapters, and then you can write the chapters to answer those questions.
Hmm. When you describe it, Josh, it sounds like so simple. It sounds like very clear. And having written a book before, now I'm kind of looking back and going, I'm not sure if I did that. Is this something you were taught? Is this something that you learned the process by going through and working with a publisher, or how did you come up with this formula?
I It really is something I learned from experience and from mistakes that I've seen, both that I made and that people I'm working with have made.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just give you an example. I worked with a very sophisticated consultant that had all sorts of knowledge about the topic that they had, and it was organized a certain way in their head. And they
Mm-hmm.
basically wrote a table of contents that fit that. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, this doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I realized, no, the problem is that they're coming at it from the organization in their brain, which of course isn't accessible to the reader.
Sure.
Whereas the reader is saying, yeah, but why do I care? Or, okay, if I accept that, what's the first thing I need to do? And those questions are a much better way to organize things, because then the person follows that sort of narrative thread in a way that seems more natural for them.
Well, it's definitely seems like a methodical process is what I'm
Mhm.
thinking in my head, but it's also it just seems like it would write a successful book if you follow this methodology, if you follow this formula. And I've always heard, start with the audience, and I heard the
Mhm.
fancy calling card thing before too. This is a fancy business card that you're writing with your book. And for me, my goal originally writing a book wasn't it was really just to have it written, because I kept having people saying, "Do you have a book? Do you have a book? Where can I buy your book?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess I gotta have a book," and getting it out there. Is that the case with many of the authors that you're working with? Is it a business initiative that's thrusting them into the writing process? Is it a personal goal, or what are the reasons that people are writing these books, do you think?
Well, I decided that rather than just making up an answer to that question, I would actually survey authors.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So in my book, there's the results of an author survey I did. We reached more than 240 nonfiction authors, of which 172 had completed and published their books. The rest were still working on them. And
Mhm,
I asked people, one of the questions was, uh, what were your main goals in publishing a book?
mhm,
The number one goal was to share the knowledge that I had. And I will also tell you, I asked people who said that, did you succeed in that goal? And more than 90% said they did succeed in that goal.
okay,
The number two goal, which about 2/3 of the people checked off, was to boost my reputation. And most of them succeeded in that as well. And the other goals that people had, some people wanted to create a speaking career or boost their speaking career. Other people wanted to generate leads for their business. Um, and while those goals vary, the people who had those also generally succeeded. The one goal that people don't generally uh, uh, do well is to make money from book sales,
mhm,
because that it really is challenging to just turn book sales into a business. I mean, the authors that I've worked with have generated more than $20 million
wow, that's
from the
great,
books that they produced. But believe me, nearly all of that was not from book sales. It was from leads or
right,
creating a business they could sell or whatever it happened to be.
mhm,
Um, and there are people who are making millions of dollars from book sales, but those books are so popular, they're also making millions of dollars from speaking if they're that good.
sure, yeah, true. And I have a question too, because I think a lot of people get into writing a book with thoughts of like, well, this will be another revenue stream for my business.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious, do you know, I mean, do most authors break even on their book projects, or is it a loss, or are they actually generating revenue? Do you have any numbers anecdotally or otherwise on that?
Yeah, well, people who publish with traditional publishers tend to get an advance, and I actually have numbers on the advances. I don't have it at my fingertips right now,
Mhm.
but in terms of what they report about book advances, is typically on the order of 30,000, 50,000, sometimes $100,000.
Wow, that's
So
great.
that certainly pays for a whole lot of your time and research.
Absolutely.
Um,
Mhm.
People who do hybrid published books, this is where you pay a publisher, to get the book out. My book, for example, was published that way, and I've
Hmm.
ghostwritten a couple of books that way. Um, they generally are not going to make back their money from book sales,
Hmm.
but they have other goals. One guy I know who did a book that way. His business, the high-end consulting business, they might get a $500,000 or $1 million consulting gig from a lead. So, get one successful lead from the book and you've succeeded, even if the book has only sold 4,000
Sure.
copies.
Hmm.
Um, I, I guess one of the best ways to look at this is I asked people in that survey, uh, are you uh, uh, are you glad that you wrote a book? Do you think this was worth it? And almost 90% agreed with that statement. So people are feeling like this is successful for them, even if it's not something that by itself is generating a huge amount of revenue.
Hmm. So yeah, it sounds like this is a question that is rolling around in my head, and
Mhm,
other people are thinking the same thing coming in as well. And there's different routes, as you were talking about working with a publisher. I mean, working with a publisher used to be the way that everyone had to write a
mhm,
book, and there wasn't self-publishing didn't exist, and Amazon on demand and things like
mhm,
this didn't exist. And now there's just a multitude of offerings that are out there, and I've heard horror stories, Josh. When I went through the process, I talked to a lot of my friends, which is probably what people
mhm,
start to do. Talk to your friends first who are authors, and then you start interviewing people who are either coaches or self-publishing folks that are guiding you through the process. And
mhm,
you get a range of prices, and you hear a range of
mhm,
experiences. Everything from it was successful, it was money well spent, to I lost it, and this was a terrible deal that I negotiated. I lost rights to my
mhm,
book, and there
mm.
were so many things along the way. Um, and I think it's tricky to navigate, at least for us, Josh. Maybe not for you. It's
Well,
tricky to navigate. What would
well,
you say to that?
no, it is tricky to navigate. In fact, that's usually one of the first questions that I get is about these publishing models. So let me
Hmm.
see if I can demystify that for people.
Sure.
Okay. Everybody is aware that there's a traditional publishing model where you pitch a publisher.
Hmm.
Um, there are a few challenges with that. One is that to be successful at that, you have to write a book proposal, which is a major effort. In addition to describing what's going to be in your book and how it's differentiated and writing a sample chapter, you have to have a marketing plan because these days publishers expect you to do all of the marketing. And you have to find an agent. And if you are successful, yes, you'll get an advance, but it typically is about 15 to 18 months after you sell the book to the publisher that it gets published. So a lot of people aren't willing to wait that long.
Yeah.
The other thing is that one of the main benefits that a traditional publisher has is the ability to get books into bookstores. Well,
Hmm.
business books, bookstores is not nearly the most important channel. It's Amazon and other online sales. So
Hmm.
not as much of an advantage. The second way to do this is to go through a hybrid publisher. My publisher Amplify is one. There's a number of other really successful ones like
Hmm.
Idea Press Publishing, Wonderwell, um, Page Two. Uh, these are really good partners to work with. They will allow you to get a book out much more quickly, and they're much more responsive than regular publishers because you're paying them. The
Hmm.
challenge here is that you're probably out somewhere on the order of 25 to $50,000 to set that up, and so for some people, a lot of people, that's just more than they're willing to invest.
Right. That's
Um,
cost prohibitive for the average I mean, if you're successful in your business, it might not be a big
well,
deal, but
well,
for the
I'm going to point out that
yeah.
the book I just published, I did that way,
Hmm.
and I've already in the first week generated enough leads to pay for all of the money that I put in.
Oh,
So
very good. Hmm.
so if you have the ability to recoup that, it's worth it. Um, uh, the third way to publish, the easiest way, is to self-publish.
Hmm.
You basically just put it up on Amazon, and even if you don't want to do it all yourself, there are people who, for about $4,000, will do a cover, copy editing, page layout, do all of the coding that's necessary to
Hmm.
have your self-published book on Amazon, and that's also the quickest way.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is self-published book doesn't really have quite the cachet that the traditionally published books have. So,
Hmm.
I'm the author of a self-published book doesn't get nearly as much attention. But if if you just want to get something out there and you don't want to make a major investment, that's now easier to do than it ever has been.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because having gone through the process now, I know
Mhm.
this, but in the beginning, I'm like, how do you even find somebody to print the book and do all the, and Amazon, all you do is like upload artwork and Amazon prints on demand. You don't have to worry about like there's
Yeah,
nothing that's
that's
required. And there's some
uh,
hybrid models in there too that you were talking about where
yeah,
you can get a local publisher to have some printings
yeah.
of it. So if you want to mail them out to people and whatnot, right? But I like how you break it down to you're reminding people too. It's not just the book; it's is the book creating opportunities for you. And we're here today talking about essential tips on how to write a business book that matters. And let's focus a little bit on that too. A business book that matters. What were your thoughts behind that, Josh?
Well, I guess the very beginning, you need to say if nobody reads it, it doesn't matter, right?
Right? Yeah.
That's the definition of vanity publishing, and believe me, you do not want to go through all this effort for that.
Hmm.
So I would say a book that matters is one that has an impact on your audience.
Hmm.
Um, I said people wanted to share the knowledge that they had. So let's say that you think, I have an insight about what digital disruption is that nobody else understands. And I
Hmm.
want the world to know that I'm the person who thought of that and to change the way they think about things. Well, a book is a way to do that. And that would be an example of a book that matters. And it doesn't have to be some huge, broad topic. Um,
Hmm.
I recently edited a book on a very, very specific topic, specifically for financial advisors.
Hmm.
And when I started with these people, I'm like, well, why do you need a book on that? And then they explained to me the financial consequences for these people of
Hmm.
making this momentous decision. I'm like, oh, I see. So there might only be, you know, 25,000 people that could benefit from a book like that, but they really need it. So it's a book that matters for them.
That's a good point. So, thinking about the audience
Mhm,
is coming full circle here as we're getting into the
mhm,
conversation, but understanding the value of the book and you mentioned this a little bit earlier when you're working with authors, having a title and a topic that's different from what other people are writing out there. I mean, that was one of my struggles in the beginning. Well, I want to write a LinkedIn book, but there are a million LinkedIn. I mean, not
mhm,
literally, but felt like it. A million LinkedIn books
mhm,
out there. What am I going to write that's different and unique? And for me, I came to the conclusion what's different and unique is my perspective on it and the stories I've encountered along the way. I imagine that's a part of your process working with your clients and making sure that what they are putting to market will be unique and will be something
mhm.
substantial. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I concentrate on that a lot. If people are interested in looking at the problem of differentiation, just go to
Hmm.
my blog bernoff.com and search differentiation, and you will see I have a blog post on all the different ways you can differentiate your book. But you need to be able to say this is the first book that.
Hmm.
Okay. This is the first book on LinkedIn that understands just how valuable it can be for your business and has step-by-step instructions on what to do about that.
Hmm.
Or this is the first book that looks at the intersection between artificial intelligence and the business of manufacturing. Um,
Hmm.
so there's always a niche. It's the first book based on personal experience here. It's the first book that that has data. I mean, one of my favorite books is Seth Stevens Davidowitz's book called Everybody Lies. That's all based on data from Google searches and
Hmm.
Pornhub searches, and he's like, "This is what people really think, as opposed to what they tell you." That was fascinating because it was the first book that really got into that. So that's the question you have to answer: is this is the first book that whatever. And
Hmm.
if there are already a bunch of books that do that, then you really haven't done your job of differentiating.
That's a good point. I like that. This is the first book that, and fill in the blank
Mhm,
on there. I really
mhm,
like that. All right, Josh, we're going to start to change gears now here, and I'm going to pull our audience into the discussion. I'm already seeing some
mhm,
comments and questions that are coming in, and I want to invite you, if you're listening in right now, if you're watching this, whether live or in playback, please drop your comments below. If you're watching in playback, I'll make sure Josh gets the link later so he can come back and answer your questions later. For those folks that are watching live, we can get some of your questions answered live in here. And don't be shy. If you are thinking about writing a book, this guy has some expertise and he can help you out in here.
Mhm.
So I want to bring up one question from Vicky O'Neill. Hey, Vicky. And I think Vicky's got a little bit of a hankering for writing a book, and she's thinking about getting one started here. And she asks, is it common for people to use their content from social media to populate chapters? She has a structure in mind. What are your thoughts there, Josh?
Mhm. Um, that actually is a very good technique. You need to debut some of the content that you're going to put in, and by publishing it in the form of a podcast or a blog post, you can get it out there and ask and see how people react. They're like, yeah, but you missed this big thing. I'm like, oh, well, it's a good thing I learned that, because before I put it in the book, I got to fix that. Or what about this other question? Like, oh, I'm going to have to add a section on that. If you look at the last two books I wrote, in each case, more than 50% of the book was debuted as blog posts.
Hmm.
But that having been said, it is not a book to take a bunch of blog posts and shovel them into a book.
Mm-hmm.
You still need to think about what the structure is. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to have a chapter on research. Oh, I did a blog post on research. I can use that as a piece of it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a good way to get yourself going. It's a good way to unblock the sluices as far as getting stuff down in writing. But that gets you to the starting line of writing the book, not to the finish line.
I like that. Really good point. And
Mhm.
absolutely talk about it on LinkedIn. By the way, I've got a book marketing checklist I'll drop into the
Mhm.
comments here for authors, and it's like things to do before you publish, things to do after you publish that could supplement some of the great insights that you've already
Mhm.
shared
Yeah.
with us here, Josh. Another question coming from Ryan Anderson. Love your photo, Ryan, where you're pointing at your name. Ryan must be a huge fan of yours, Josh, because he's already seen your book available on Amazon, and
Mhm.
he said it looks like it's going to come out on Audible. If so, what is your ETA, and what's your general recommendation for folks if they're publishing? Should they be thinking about audiobook as a version as well?
Yeah, so the audiobook part of publishing is growing. Um, and it's interesting because people may have less time to read, but they're exercising or they're commuting, and they listen to books at times like that. So it absolutely is worthwhile to do an audiobook. And a lot of authors tell me that they make more money from the audiobooks than they do from the traditional books. Um, you also can record your own narration. Um, that's not for everybody, but in all of the books I've done, I have recorded my own narration. And I think even though I am not the world's best audio narrator, there's this authenticity that comes from listening to the author. And
Yeah.
as the author narrator, you can emphasize things and deliver it the way you want. Now, to answer Brian's question specifically, I had everything all lined up so that the audiobook would come out at the same time. And then there was a little glitch called COVID.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So at the last moment, the audiobook producer was like, okay, we have 10 drop-ins, places that you recorded that didn't quite come out right, and you need to record just these passages. And I'm like, I can't actually talk right now.
Oh,
so
yeah.
so that got put off, and as a result, the schedule for the audiobook got put off. And where
Mhm.
we are right now is the masters are done. I have gone to ACX and uploaded them, which is a new experience for me. I'd never done that before.
Mhm.
And there's some sort of a tax glitch which they're working out. So based on what my audiobook producer tells me, that should be available within 2 or 3 weeks. So it'll
Okay.
be there. It'll be there for almost everybody who looks at it, but not quite in sync with the delivery of the other forms of the book.
There we
It's
go.
on it's on ebook if somebody wants it that way.
Okay, that's good. And I want to just echo what you said about audiobook and having your own voice. I don't know if this
Mhm.
has ever happened to you, Josh, where you're following a favorite author and you're reading their printed book, and then you see them on Audible, so you download one of their audiobooks and you start listening to it. And I've heard these people in interviews and stuff before. I'm like, well, that's not Josh. And I feel like, I mean, getting back to that authenticity, I mean, they can say the words and they can be
Mhm.
factually true, but even the way right now I'm enunciating certain
Mhm.
things, it's my emphasis, and there's this whole other level, the context that's brought in when you in your voice are saying it.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're recording a book, you're not reading it verbatim from the book. Sometimes you are, but then sometimes you're ad-libbing a little bit as you go along, right?
They don't like you to do that, but yeah, you can
Yeah.
do that. Um, the I'll just to share an experience when I wrote my first book, Groundswell, with
Mhm,
Charlene Lee. I wanted to do the audiobook narration, and the
mhm.
person that had the audiobook rights was like, "Okay, well, record yourself and send us a tape." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll have to audition to
Yeah.
audio to narrate my own book." So I said, "Oh, I can do this. I read to my kids all the time. I'm used to reading out loud." So I sent it in, and their response was, "Okay, that's barely acceptable."
Aw.
So I made the cut, but just barely, and I'm like, "Okay, I gotta up my game here. I have to learn a little
Yeah,
bit more about narration."
yeah.
Having done a whole lot more since then, I could never narrate somebody else's book
Mhm,
because it's very different to read somebody else's words than your own. But
mhm.
but I know exactly what I wanna say. The cadences in my head are
Exactly.
are what I already wrote, and I do a reasonable job with that.
Yeah. I think with your own voice, because you know what you're trying to say, and it's almost like acting, it's a craft, of being an audiobook, narrator,
Mhm.
understanding the different intonations and moods and emphasis points and things like that. So, very good question. Thank you for asking that. That was from Ryan. Here's another question coming in from Joey. And Joey says, "How do you decide on the purchase price or the retail price for your self-published book?" And Joey says he's asking for a friend on this one. What do you
Asking
think,
for a
Josh?
friend. Um, well, I think you wanna decide what the value is, and you wanna look at books of similar length and see what they're charging.
Mhm,
So, these days, a full-length hardback, business book of, let's say, like, 270 pages is likely to be priced at about $30. And if you self-publish, it's going to be a paperback, so that's probably somewhat less. But you want to look at similar length paperbacks and say, okay, this is what I'm going to charge.
mhm,
Now, there's a strategic thing you can do, which is you can reduce the price to encourage more people to get it because it's a deal.
mhm.
Um, and yes, if all the other books the length of your book are priced at $16 and you price yours at 8.95, people will be interested in it. But
Mhm.
it also sends a message that says, "Oh, my book is worth less than these other people's
Right.
books."
Mm,
So I would say as a temporary thing, it's like, "Oh, special. It's cheap right now." That actually is workable, but you want to be careful with that. The other
mm,
thing you can do is you can actually on Kindle, you can price books at 0.
mm,
Um,
mhm.
and that's one way to generate a lot of interest. But in general, you don't want it to be at 0 forever. You want that to be like if you buy within the next 2 weeks, you can get it for free.
That's great. Good point. Yeah, and there, I remember when I did buy my book launch, I had like the pre-launch price, which was a little bit of a discount, and I
Mhm.
did local delivery. So it was hype during pandemic too, so I had to
Mhm.
hype it up and try some different techniques there. But great thoughts there on kind of shopping around, looking at others' prices as well, and understanding the value. You don't want to underprice and have people go, well, it must not be that good. If it's only a 99-cent book, it must not have a lot of great content in there. So really love those points on there. And I do see you've got some readers that are joining us here, and folks like Kate Lee, who is saying, Kate's halfway through your new book. It's such an honest and compelling read. She's already recommended it to several people. Speaking of recommending the book to other
Mhm.
people, book testimonials, things like that, how does that factor in to your book's success? Should you be encouraging your readers to leave you testimonials and Amazon reviews, and should you be merchandising that? What's your take on that, Josh?
Well, there's sort of two ways to look at that.
Hmm.
One is should you get endorsements?
Hmm.
And those are absolutely worth doing. They don't sell books, but they add credibility. They basically move people over the hump. And
Hmm.
I can't resist mentioning here that I did something that nobody else does in my book. I reached out to a whole lot of authors, and that's been endorsed by 50 business authors. And that's not something
That's great.
it's very time consuming to manage 50 endorsements, but that was worth it. certainly once the book is done, you want to do everything you can to encourage Amazon reviews. If you
Mhm.
go to get a book and there are very few Amazon reviews, and I have to say, my book being brand new, there's none of them up there now. If you're
Mhm.
reading it, post a review. Now's the time to
Post a
do it.
review.
I want a review, but it makes so much difference, and more is better. So if just imagine that you're going to Amazon and you see two books on the topic, and one of
Mhm.
them has 5 reviews and they're all 5 stars, and
Mhm.
the other one has 75 reviews and they're 85% 5 stars.
Sure.
You're much more likely to want to get the second book because you're like, oh wow, this
More
is a
numbers,
lot of
right?
people really like this thing. So
Mhm.
it's better to get more reviews than to focus on whether they're all perfect. And
Mhm.
I think it's immoral, and it's probably against Amazon's rules to tell people that they have to post a 5 star review. I tell
Mhm.
people I want your reviews, but I'm not going to tell them what to write. They can figure that out.
Mhm. Yeah, good point. So thank you, Kate, for being a reader and
Mm.
being a fan
Oh
of
yeah,
Josh and joining us in here. And she's saying she's already recommended it to several people, so which is
excellent.
great.
Mhm.
All right. So we're going to start to wind up our conversation here today, Josh. And as we do so, I'm going to pull up your LinkedIn profile up on screen. And while I'm pulling that up in the background, can you remind us, are you open to connecting with people on LinkedIn? And if so, is there anything that we should reference when we are inviting you to connect on LinkedIn?
Um, I am very much open to connections. You should say that you heard about it on Brenda Miller's podcast, so I know who you are. Um, and I will like you, except if the immediately after connecting you try and pitch and sell me something, and then you should burn in hellfire forever. But 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 I know you know those people. Everyone has encountered those people. But other than that, yeah, absolutely, I'm very interested in hearing from people. And I will do my best to answer people's relatively simple questions right there. So if you post and you say, I was thinking, should I do this or should I do that? I will actually try and answer your question on LinkedIn after we've connected.
That's great.
Mhm.
And I noticed since we talked originally, I know you've made at least a couple changes to your LinkedIn
Mhm.
profile, and I have to commend you on that. I know you changed out your headshot photo because we were talking about that in the pre-show, and it's now matching the headshot photo that's on your website.
Mhm.
But the banner image with all the books, I think that's different too, Josh. I don't remember that from
Mhm.
before. Is that a
Yeah.
new update?
So yes, it is. Well, I
Mhm.
just want to say this. This is an endorsement of you, Brenda. So I've been on social media a long time, which just reflects the fact that my first book was about social media.
Mhm.
And one of my biggest assets was having been there for so long, I had 25,000 Twitter followers.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that was really useful for a while in terms of publicizing things. But over the last year or so, Twitter has started to really suck. so,
Yeah,
so
unfortunately,
and
right?
and I had neglected LinkedIn. I was like, oh, that's just a place where you connect with people. And I
Mhm.
started to go in there. I started to see, and I'm like, this is way better.
Yeah, well,
If I,
it's funny because we I say we, LinkedIn, we gained
yeah,
a lot of people
uh,
during the past
uh,
few years from
uh,
Twitter, from Facebook,
uh,
because of all the drama that was happening, and people got
that's
tired
That's
of it.
exactly right. And what I found was that if I put the same post in front of 25,000 Twitter followers and
Mhm,
on LinkedIn, I would get 10 times as much interaction on LinkedIn.
mhm.
So, Brenda, you were so exact, I hadn't paid attention to it, and
Mhm.
Brenda's like, "You need to change this and this and this." I'm like,
And
"Oh
I remember
yeah, these are
when we were
really good
first talking,
ideas."
I'm always like, and it was a little intimidating for me, and I'm like, "Josh is like
No,
a really cool,
I had
book figure," and I'm
I
like, "Do you mind if I give you advice? Is it
No,
okay if I
it
give you,
was
like"
it was it was like the beautiful back garden that hadn't been weeded or watered in a long time, and I was like,
Right,
"Oh, you know what? This will be really nice if I just put a little bit of energy into it."
yeah.
Uh,
And I want to point out for those folks that are visiting your profile, I know that you've got creator mode turned on, and creator mode is a
mhm,
new version of LinkedIn that they rolled out in the past few years. One of the things that happens when you turn on creator mode is when people visit your profile, your default button that they'll see, it used to be connect and now it will be follow. So if folks want to connect with you, Josh, they can, but they'll have to click on your more button or the three dots. And then
mm,
underneath that, they'll see an option that will either say personalize invite or connect. So For those of you that are visiting Josh's profile, you know what I'm talking about here. You're like, oh, that's why I'm not seeing connect. It is there. You just got to dig around for it a little
I was really hoping to come on your podcast to get LinkedIn tips. So
bit. I would give you some more, but I think we're a little bit short on time. But if you're
okay.
ever interested in more tips, Josh, I'd be happy to give you some pointers
Oh,
here
I
and there.
probably will be. No, but that's terrific.
That's awesome. All right. And then I want to show folks your website as well, because we were talking about this in the background.
Mm.
And as I'm pulling this up, can you remind us, if people want to learn more about working with you, what are the programs or products or services that you offer?
Okay. So I just redid this, um, uh, the site. So if you go to bernoff.com, a few things. The daily blog I post every weekday, and
Hmm.
I have for 8 years. So
Okay.
there's a lot of useful stuff there. Um, uh, the Under author services, you can see the stuff that I help authors with. I help people with idea development. I help them with editing. Uh, in on very selectively, I help people with ghostwriting. Um,
Hmm.
and I help them with creating book proposals to pitch traditional publishers. So these are all services I can offer, but I am at this point, open to what people need to know about, and I
Hmm.
certainly would be pleased to be able to work with people who think they want to go forward. I give a lot of free advice too. So
Yeah.
yes, will you edit my book for free? No, I will not.
No.
But 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 can you tell me, should I do this or should I do that? I'm more likely to just say, okay, here's the best way to do that.
Yeah.
Really, the simplest thing for people to do is to just I got 8 years worth of wisdom accumulated in here. Read the book. The
Hmm.
answer that you want is probably in here, and the index is excellent because I did that too. So
That's great. Well, we're pointing right now to bernoff.com/books for those that might be listening to this
yeah,
on in the podcast later on. It's
yeah,
bernoff.com. And if you go to that website/books, you can see a listing of the books that Josh has written, the most recent being Build a Better Business Book. And I think you said you can find it on Amazon or you can buy it through the website. Is that correct, Josh?
right. It's also
Okay.
on bookshop.org for people who hate Amazon.
Okay. I'm hearing a lot of those people too, and that's part of the reason I make
um,
my book available purchase direct through my website, because some people are kind of moving off of the Amazon train and they're wanting to support local or go direct in their
okay,
sales as well.
you
So,
you if you go to if you click on the button on my website, it takes you not to Amazon but to my publisher's website.
okay.
So that's one way that you can go direct,
Hmm.
and it actually tends to get to you faster from the publisher if you want to do it that way.
Oh, good to
Right.
know. Okay.
Okay.
So this would be a good starting point for those folks that are listening in that maybe want to write a book today, is to start by buying your book, right? Getting on that
Uh,
path there.
it's got everything you need in there. Yep.
Good. Well, I see, at least I know we've inspired many people, but I see one in particular I want to call out, David Ball. And David says he has a real life story he'd like to publish. And he's saying your session today has really helped him to think about it much more realistically. So I have to echo David's sentiment on here. Josh, thank you for your insights and for sharing this with us today. Any final comments for us on essential tips on how to write a business book that matters?
Well, I just want people to know, uh, if you think this isn't something that you can do and you don't have the skills to do it, you
Mhm.
can get started. You can start working on it, and no, it probably is within your capabilities. If you think it's going to be simple and easy and everything will be fine, that's probably wrong too. There are a lot of elements to it, but by demystifying it, I hope that I've given people a chance to get started and think about different ways that they could publish their stories.
Good. Well, consider this your nudge for those people that are listening
Mhm.
in, watching, or watching the playback later. Consider this your nudge on getting your business book started. It is possible, and I think with Josh's guidance, you can get there faster. So, as we start to wrap up our conversation here today, Josh, I just want to remind anyone who is watching, if you enjoyed the discussion, could you do us a favor? And that is, as soon as this video is done playing on LinkedIn, there's going to be a share button that will pop up in the bottom. Click on that share button and share it out as a LinkedIn post. And this is a really great technique if you have not posted recently on LinkedIn. Maybe you haven't yet posted this week, this month, or this year. It's already, gosh, middle of June going into July here. Go ahead and share the post on LinkedIn and tag Josh and I when you do so. Use that @ to tag us in the post. That way we'll get notified that you're mentioning us, and maybe tell people why they should watch the video or something that you learn from watching here. You never know who you're going to help by doing so, and we would greatly appreciate you to share that along. Well, Josh, this has been a delight. I know one of my first stops after we're done here is going to be to pick up your book. I'm going to go to your link and pick up myself a copy of that, and I look forward to reading it. And perhaps we can have you back in the future and have more conversations along this line as well.
No, I'd be happy to be back anytime except for 9:30 p.m. tonight. So.
I was going to say, at 9:05 tonight, we're going to have a couple people knocking on LinkedIn going, where are they? I did put the playback link on the page, though, so they'll find us there later.
It's not a question of how you make mistakes or what mistakes you make. It's how you recover. So you did a fine job.
You know what? I always tell people I don't call them mistakes. I call them learning experiences. And I always pull back the curtain and I tell people what happened and I tell people what I'm going to do. And I'm like, this will be good. This will be good fodder for the show here today to tell people about. So it's all good.
Well, I've made a lot of learning experiences in my life. That's for sure.
There you go. Well, it's been a delight, Josh. And I'm going to thank Bobby for introducing you as well. And I want to thank everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed the show. And reminder, if you haven't already left a comment, do so before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you again on LinkedIn. Stay safe and stay healthy and have a wonderful week. And Josh, thank you again for your time. I look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
Thanks, Brenda. It's been great to be on.
All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you on LinkedIn. Bye-bye.